Would you like to hear a story? It's a true story, one that I believe will help you understand more about life. Sit down, I'm going to tell you. Don't rush, I'm not in a hurry. You know, last week I got news from the doctor. He told me my time is limited. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, he said. You only have a few months left, he told me, with that look I know so well, the look a doctor gives when there's nothing more to be done. But before I leave this world, I want to tell my story. The story of a girl whose life was marked by suffering, but who eventually found a way to rise. Can you imagine it? A little girl living in fear, in darkness, abused by her own grandfather. And yet, in spite of everything, I managed to overcome. And today, I share this story because I know someone will hear it and realize they're not alone. Maybe there's someone like me, suffering in silence, thinking there's no way out, but I want to tell them that there is always a way out. My name is Maggie, and around here, everyone knows me as Mrs. Maggie from the pharmacy. I'm 75 years old now, I've lived a long life, and now I want you to hear my story. I'm not a pharmacist. I never had the education for that. I was a clerk my whole life. I learned through practice how to recommend remedies for headaches, teas for stomach problems, ointments for wounds. It's ironic that now all the medicines in the world can't save me. I was born in a simple house on Red Clay Farm, about 4 miles from Oakville. A wooden house with a dirt floor and a roof that let you see the stars on cloudless nights. It was me, my mother Sarah, my grandmother Eleanor, who barely left her bed because of her swollen legs that could no longer support her body, and my grandfather George, who was the man of the house since my father went to buy cigarettes and never came back. The truth is, my father never even got to know me. He disappeared when he found out my mother was pregnant. She was 15, he was in his 20s, and responsibility wasn't his strong suit. My mother returned to her parents' house with her head down, carrying in her womb the shame that having a child without a husband was in those days. My grandfather George never let her forget that sin. He was a tall, sturdy man with thick eyebrows that came together when he got angry, which happened practically every day. He worked at the cotton mill, cutting cotton from sunup to sundown. He would come home smelling of sour sweat, burned cotton, and cheap whiskey. You were the one who wanted to give it up to the first man who came along. Now deal with it. He would tell my mother almost every night, especially after the bottle was half empty. You brought this bastard into the world. Now she's your cross to bear. I grew up hearing this. I grew up knowing I was a burden, a mistake, a cross. My mother never answered him. She worked as a washerwoman in the houses of landowners. She would leave before the sun had even appeared and return with red hands and shoulders drooping with exhaustion. She spoke little, smiled even less. Life had taken from her any will to react. My grandmother Eleanor was more affectionate when my grandfather wasn't around. She told me stories, taught me songs, stroked my head until I fell asleep. But as soon as she heard his footsteps approaching, she would send me to the room, lower her head, and stay quiet. The man of the house must be respected, she would say, as if repeating a prayer someone had taught her. It was she who taught me to read and write, hidden from my grandfather. "Girl, you don't need school," he would yell when my mother talked about enrolling me. "You'll learn foolishness, get pregnant just like your mother." So my grandmother taught me letters and numbers, using twigs on the dirt ground in the yard, erasing everything when he arrived. We were dirt poor. Our house had only 2 rooms. The living room, which was also the kitchen, with a wood stove in one corner, a crooked table in the middle, and a bedroom where we all slept together. My mother and I on a mat on the floor. My grandparents on a bed of sticks that creaked from age. The bathroom was a small shack of straw in the back of the yard with a hole in the ground that stank in the summer and overflowed during the rainy season. We ate what we could. Grits with gravy most days, sometimes fried catfish when a neighbor caught extra and shared. Green bananas cooked to deceive hunger. Meat only on very special occasions, or when my grandfather spent the whole week's money on a spree and brought home a piece of ham the next day out of guilt to please the women. Life was hard, but we carried on as best we could. My mother worked more and more, taking cleaning jobs, washing clothes, whatever came up. I helped as much as I could from a young age, learning to wash, iron, cook. My grandmother got worse with each winter. her legs swelling more, her breathing becoming more difficult, until she could barely leave the bed. And my grandfather, he was always a difficult man, loud, heavy-handed. He would hit my mother for anything: food without salt, poorly ironed clothes, a look he interpreted as defiance. I grew up afraid of him, hiding when I heard his footsteps, trembling when his voice changed. But everything got worse when I turned 12, and my body began to change. Suddenly, his look toward me became different. It wasn't just anger or impatience anymore. It was something I can't quite explain, something that made me feel dirty just receiving it. He began making comments when he passed by me. "Turning into a little woman, huh?" Or, "Who would have thought you'd fill out like that?" My grandmother noticed. One day she called me close to her bed, took my hand with those gnarled, swollen fingers, and whispered, "Don't stay alone with your grandfather, my granddaughter. If he comes home and your mother isn't here, go to Martha Jenkins' house. Make up any excuse, but don't stay here." I didn't understand properly at the time, or maybe I didn't want to understand, but I started being more alert, avoiding being at home when my mother wasn't there. I would go to school even without supplies. I'd stay there helping the teacher clean the classroom just to avoid going home early. On weekends, I'd offer to help neighbors with small children, with yards to sweep, with anything that would keep me away from home. One Easter Sunday in April, I remember to this day, there was no way to escape. It was raining so hard that the streets had turned into rivers of red mud. My mother had gone to deliver clean laundry to a farm 3 miles from home and wouldn't return until Sunday. And my grandmother was worse than ever, with a high fever that left her between conscious and delirious. I was taking care of her as best I could, putting a wet cloth on her forehead, giving water to her parched mouth, quietly praying all the prayers I knew. That's when I heard the front door slam. It was my grandfather, coming home earlier than usual from the mill, soaked with rain and already stinking of whiskey. "Where's the food?" he shouted from the living room. "I'll make it now, Grandpa," I answered, leaving the room. "I was taking care of Grandma. Her fever won't break." He looked at me in a way that made me freeze in place. "Your grandmother already has 1 foot in the grave anyway. I'm hungry and cold, and I need to eat and warm up." The way he said that, the way his eyes roamed over my body, made me feel a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. I started trembling, wanting to run away, but where to? The storm was lashing the roof. Mud covered everything outside. "I'll light the fire and make some cornbread," I said, trying to move away, to go to the kitchen. He grabbed my arm forcefully. "The fire I want isn't the kind you light in a stove." What happened next was quick, and at the same time, eternal. He dragged me to the bedroom, threw me on the mat where I slept. I remember the weight of him suffocating me, the smell of cotton and sweat making me nauseous, the pain that felt like it would tear me in half. I remember screaming, begging, calling for my mother, for God, for anyone who could save me from that hell. And that's when the unexpected happened. My grandmother, that woman who could barely get up to go to the bathroom, was standing at the bedroom door. I don't know where she found the strength. The fever perhaps gave her an energy she hadn't had in years. She was holding in her hand the wooden crucifix that stayed on the improvised altar in the living room. A heavy crucifix, made of solid wood. "Get off her, demon," she said, her voice weak, but full of a fury I had never heard before. My grandfather laughed and continued what he was doing, as if she wasn't there, as if she were just a fly bothering him. That's when the front door opened with a bang. It was my mother, soaked to the bone. The rain had made the river rise, blocking the path to the farm, and she had returned. She stood there, looking at the scene, her eyes wide with horror. What happened in the following seconds changed our lives forever. My mother, that woman who never raised her voice, who lowered her head to everything, let out a scream that didn't seem human, a scream that held 20 years of humiliation, of fear, of submission, and she lunged forward. My mother was advancing like a tigress protecting her cub. I'll never forget what happened next. She jumped on my grandfather's back with a strength that didn't seem like hers. That frail woman who spent the day scrubbing clothes on the river rocks dug her nails into his neck, drawing blood. He let go of me instantly, trying to free himself from her, cursing, foaming with rage. "You bitch, let go of me," he screamed, spinning like a wild bull, trying to throw my mother off his back. I crawled to the corner, pulling the remnants of my torn clothes to cover myself, my whole body aching. I saw when my grandfather managed to throw my mother against the wall. She hit hard, fell to the floor, but quickly got up. There was a gleam in her eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't fear anymore. It was a fury that came from somewhere else. My grandmother, still holding the wooden crucifix, was near the door. My grandfather didn't see her there. He turned to my mother, the belt already in his hand. "Now you'll see what happens to a woman who meddles where she shouldn't." That's when my grandmother, that sick lady who could barely walk, hit him on the head with the crucifix with a force that could only have come from God. The sound was horrible. A dry crack, like when a thick tree branch breaks. My grandfather stood still for a second, as if he hadn't understood what had happened. Then he toppled sideways like a felled tree, knocking over the table on his way down. He was unconscious but still breathing. A silence fell that seemed endless. All you could hear was the rain hitting the roof and our heavy breathing. The three of USME, my mother, and my grandmother looking at my grandfather's body, stretched out on the floor, a trickle of blood running from his head and mixing with the dust on the dirt floor. "Is he dead?" That was all I could ask, my voice barely coming out. My mother approached him slowly, like someone approaching a snake that might be pretending to be dead. She knelt, put her hand on his neck, feeling for a pulse. Then she turned to us, her face a mixture of horror and relief. "He's still breathing, but he's in bad shape." My grandmother let the crucifix fall to the floor. Her legs, already normally weak, seemed to have lost all strength. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. "If he recovers, he'll kill all three of us," she said, her voice firmer than I had ever heard it. "Sarah, you know what needs to be done." The two of them looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity. Something passed between them in that look, a silent understanding, a decision that needed no words. My mother nodded, took a deep breath, and turned to me. "Go to Martha Jenkins' house. Tell her you're afraid of the storm, that we asked you to stay there tonight. Don't tell anyone what happened here. If they ask about your grandfather, say he left before the rain got heavy and hasn't returned yet. But Mom, and you and Grandma, what are you going to do? The less you know, the better. It will be better for everyone. Go, sweetheart. Trust your mother." I looked at my grandmother, looking for some sign that I should stay, but she nodded, telling me to obey my mother. I ran out into the rain, not caring about the mud, about the water that was soaking me to the bone. I ran as if the devil were on my heels. In a way, he was. Martha Jenkins was our closest neighbor, which still meant quite a walk. When I arrived at her door, I was dripping water, trembling. I don't know if from cold, from fear, or from the pain pulsing between my legs. "Mercy, child, what happened?" I told the story my mother had made up, that I was afraid of the storm, that the house was leaking water from the roof, that they had sent me there. Martha didn't ask any more questions. She gave me dry clothes, a warm meal, and a place to sleep near the fireplace. Despite her kindness, I couldn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of my grandfather, his smell, the pain. I saw the crucifix hitting his head, the blood on the floor. I wondered what my mother and grandmother had done after I left, if he had woken up, if he had killed them, if they had. The next day, the rain had stopped. A weak sun was trying to break through the heavy clouds that still covered the sky. I said goodbye to Martha, thanked her for the hospitality, and started walking back home. My legs seemed to weigh tons. Each step was an enormous effort. When I arrived, I found my mother sweeping the yard as if it were any ordinary day. Her face was serene, almost calm. When she saw me, she smiled. A small, tired smile, but real. "Good morning, honey. Did you sleep well at Martha's?" I looked around, looking for some sign of what had happened the night before. The yard was clean. Inside the house, the floor had been washed. The table that had fallen was back in place. There was no sign of a struggle, nor of blood, nor of my grandfather. "Where is he?" I asked, not having the courage to say his name. "Your grandfather left. He's gone. He won't be coming back." The way she said it, firm, definitive, made me understand that I shouldn't ask more questions. At least not there. Not at that moment. I entered the house somewhat suspicious, finding all that calm strange. My grandmother was in bed, as always, her hands trembling, holding a rosary. When she saw me, she gestured for me to come closer. "My granddaughter," she whispered. "No one will ever hurt you in this house again. Never again." Something in her voice, in her look, told me it was true, that my grandfather, wherever he was, would not return to torment us. "We need to talk," my mother said, sitting with us in the bedroom. "What happened yesterday can't leave these walls. Your grandfather left us just like your father did. He went after another woman in another town, understand?" I nodded. "And if people ask why he didn't say goodbye, why he didn't take his things? When a man decides to leave with another woman, he goes just as he is," my grandmother added. "He leaves everything behind. That's what happened. Period." That same afternoon, my mother took the few clothes of my grandfather and threw them all onto a bonfire she made in the yard. She said it was to ward off bad luck. When the fire began to die, she threw a handful of coarse salt onto the embers, murmuring words I didn't understand. A ritual to close a chapter, to cleanse the house of his presence. The neighbors, of course, asked about my grandfather. My mother told the story they had agreed on with such conviction that even I almost believed it. "A young woman at the mill, young, pretty, turned his head," she would say, wiping away a tear that didn't exist. No one asked more questions. They just shook their heads, saying it was a shame, offering help if we needed it. The days went by. The absence of my grandfather, instead of being missed, brought a peace we had never known before. There were no more shouts, nor slaps, nor constant fear. The house, even small and poor, seemed larger, brighter, as if a shadow had been removed from every corner. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother singing while washing clothes. I saw my grandmother smile, without having to hide. As for me, the wounds of the body were healing gradually. Those of the soul, well, those would take much longer. I would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming, feeling his weight on me. I was afraid when men came too close. I could no longer visit neighbors' houses where the husband was present. Any smell of whiskey made me nauseous. My mother noticed. One night after we finished cleaning the kitchen after dinner, she sat with me on the edge of the bed. "Daughter, we need to talk about what happened. I know it's difficult, that it hurts to remember, but keeping this inside you will eat away at you like termites eat wood. Slowly, silently, until one day everything collapses." That night, for the first time, I truly cried for what had happened. No more silent tears of fear or shame, but a loud, desperate cry that came from the depths. My mother hugged me tightly, let me wet her shoulder, let me release everything that was trapped. "It wasn't your fault," she repeated like a prayer. "It wasn't your fault. He was the monster, not you." After the crying came a kind of calm. Like after a storm, when the sky is still cloudy, but the rain has stopped, and you can see a small piece of blue sky between the clouds. "What happened to him?" I finally asked. "The truth?" My mother hesitated for a moment, her eyes fixed on a random spot on the wall. "Your grandfather won't be coming back," was all she said. "Not to hurt us, not to be arrested for what he did. And it's better we don't know more than that." Later, much later, years later, when I was already an adult, my grandmother told me the truth on a night of high fever, when she thought she was going to die. After I left, they tried to help my grandfather. Not out of kindness, but because they didn't want to be arrested for murder. But he remained unconscious, barely breathing. They decided they had to get rid of him, to protect themselves and me. In the early morning, when the rain had eased a bit, my mother went out with the wheelbarrow we used to carry firewood. She took his unconscious body to a deeper part of the river, which was still swollen from the rain. She tied stones to his feet and hands with wire and rope, believing he would drown. She said a Lord's Prayer, not for his soul, but for the waters to carry him far away, hoping to never see him again. The next day, they tidied the house, cleaned away any trace. The river continued to rise with the rains of that week. When it subsided, there was no sign of the body. The currents must have carried him to the sea or buried him in the mud at the bottom. No one ever looked for him. In those days, in rural areas, a man who abandoned his family was too common to attract attention. If any acquaintance from the mill found his disappearance strange, no one came to ask at our house. We lived like that for almost a year, the three of us. Life was hard, money was always scarce, but there was peace, there was respect, there were even some moments of joy. My grandmother taught me everything she knew. Herbal remedies, blessings, old prayers that her mother had taught her. My mother continued working in the houses of landowners, but now with her head held high, without fear of coming home. I went back to school. The teacher noticed the change in me. Before I was cheerful, talkative. After that night I became quiet, withdrawn, scared. She tried to talk, asked if something had happened. I didn't tell her, of course. That secret had to stay buried as deeply as my grandfather must have been, but not everything was rosy. The poisonous tongues of the neighborhood began to whisper that it was strange that my grandfather had disappeared like that, without saying goodbye to anyone. That maybe he hadn't left of his own free will. Suspicious looks began to follow my mother when she went to the store. Questions half disguised about when was the last time we had news of him. It was then that my mother made a decision that would change the course of our lives. "We're leaving here," she announced one night after dinner. "This land doesn't want us anymore, and we don't need it either." "Where to?" I asked, frightened by the idea of leaving the only place I knew. "Atlanta," she said, her eyes shining with a determination I had never seen before. "The big city, where nobody knows us, where we can start again, without a past, without this story weighing on our shoulders." My grandmother, already very ill at that time, just nodded. "It's for the best. Here the walls have ears and the ears have big mouths." And so, on a morning in early April of 1968, I remember to this day, because it was right when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on the 4th of April, we took what little we had: old clothes, pots, my grandmother's mattress, the statue of the Virgin Mary that she had received at her baptism, everything that fit into a borrowed cart that a kinder neighbor helped us take to the bus station. We left behind the wooden house, the yard where I had played in childhood, the mango tree loaded with fruit in the yard. We left curious neighbors, unanswered questions, malicious whispers. We left the river that had taken my grandfather, and with him that night of horror became just a distant memory. At the bus station, my mother bought 3 one-way tickets to Atlanta. When the bus began to pull away, I looked through the dusty window. I saw Red Clay Farm getting smaller in the distance, the buildings of Oakville town blending with the earth. I felt a tightness in my chest, a mixture of relief and fear of the unknown. "Don't look back, my daughter," my mother whispered, holding my hand. "What's past is past. From now on, just look ahead." At that moment, crossing the rusty gate that marked the boundary of the farm, I didn't know what awaited us. I didn't know that life in the big city would be so different, so difficult, and, at the same time, full of possibilities that I never dreamed existed. I didn't know that my grandmother wouldn't last more than a few months in that new life. I didn't know that I was leaving behind not just a place, but a version of myself. The innocent girl who died that rainy night, giving way to another, marked by pain, but also by strength, which is only born after you survive the impossible. The only thing I knew was that whatever came ahead would be better than what we were leaving behind, and that at that moment was enough to give me courage to continue the journey. Arriving in Atlanta was like landing on another planet. I, who had never left Red Clay Farm, suddenly found myself in a big city, with buildings, asphalt, honking cars, people running everywhere. My country girl eyes couldn't absorb so much novelty at once. The first week we stayed in a cheap boarding house room in the Riverside district, near the port. A dark cubicle that I shared with my mother and grandmother, the 3 of us piled onto a single bed. The bathroom was communal at the end of the corridor, always with a line. The food came from a to-go container that my mother brought from the job she found on the second day, as a house cleaner in a family home in Buckhead, where the rich people of the city lived. My grandmother got worse with the move. The humid air of the capital, mixed with the pollution from cars and the smoke from factories, punished her already weak lungs. She coughed day and night without being able to sleep. The rheumatism attacked with force, swelling her already deformed joints even more. "Don't worry about me," she would say when she noticed our concern. "I've lived what I had to live. I helped get you out of that hell. Now I can rest in peace." Even sick, it was she who taught me how to get around in the big city. How to ride the bus without being cheated on the change. How to recognize the dangerous types who stayed on corners. How to stretch the little money we had, buying at the end of the market when prices dropped. While my mother worked, I took care of my grandmother and looked for a job. It wasn't easy. I was only 13, with no official education, no experience. Doors closed as soon as they looked at me. A skinny girl from the country, with a heavy accent and patched clothes. 3 months after arriving in Atlanta, we managed to rent a shack in the South Side projects. It was small, but at least it was ours, without neighbors on the other side of the wall, without a line for the bathroom. My mother had been promoted in the house where she worked, from cleaner to cook. She earned a bit better. She brought leftover food that the boss left, sometimes even used clothes that fit me. It was at this time that I met Ruth Jackson, our neighbor on the right, a black woman in her 50s, a widow, who sold cornbread at the beach. In the first few days, she appeared with a dish of peach cobbler, welcoming us. When she saw the state of my grandmother, she didn't think twice. "This lady needs a tea of pine needles with honey. I'll get it from my house." The tea didn't cure my grandmother. At that point nothing would, but it eased the cough, gave a little comfort. Ruth began to come every day, bringing herbs, prayers, affection. She was a midwife in her spare time, knew remedies for everything. "What doctors do with a scalpel, I do with my hands and my plants," she would say proudly. When I told her roughly what had happened on the farm, without going into details about what my grandfather had done or how he had gone away, Ruth squeezed my hand firmly. "A woman wasn't born to be a punching bag for any man. Your mother and grandmother did what they had to do. Now it's time to look forward and rebuild." It was she who arranged my first job. Her sister had a fruit stall in the Sweet Auburn market and needed help. She paid little, almost nothing really, food, a few coins, and leftover fruit that I took home, but it was a start. I would wake up at 4 in the morning, help set up the stall, spend the day shouting, "Look at the bananas, look at the peaches, they're fresh, they're sweet." I would come back at dusk, feet swollen from standing so long, but with a few coins in my pocket. Every cent I earned went straight into an empty tin can that I hid under my mattress. "A woman's money has to be hidden even from ants," Ruth taught. "You never know when you'll need to run away or fend for yourself." My grandmother passed away on a Sunday dawn, 6 months after we arrived in Atlanta. It was peaceful, in her sleep, without suffering. A blessing after so much pain. I woke up to my mother sobbing quietly beside the mat where my grandmother slept. She didn't need to say anything. The serene face of my grandmother, without the wrinkles of pain that had marked her face for years, told everything. We didn't have money for a coffin, much less for a funeral. It was Ruth who organized everything. She gathered the women of the community, washerwomen, maids, prostitutes, vendors like herself, and each gave what they could. One knew a guy from the funeral home who gave a friendly price. Another had a cousin who was a gravedigger and arranged a little corner in the cemetery without needing much paperwork. The one from farthest away brought flowers from her own yard. The oldest led the rosary. That afternoon, seeing all those women, most of them strangers, coming together to help us, I understood something important. There is a strength that is born when women unite. A strength that has nothing to do with muscles or violence, but with solidarity, with the silent understanding of those who have gone through similar pains. The death of my grandmother left a huge hole, but it also freed us. She suffered so much that, in a way, she kept our pain alive too. After the funeral, it was as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders. We could finally think about truly living, not just surviving. My mother decided it was time for me to go back to school. "My daughter won't spend her life selling fruit at the market," she said firmly. She'll get an education. She'll be somebody in life. She enrolled me in a public school near home. I had to start from zero in the first grade, even though I was already 14. I was the oldest in the class, the big girl who barely fit in the desk. The children laughed at my heavy accent, my patched clothes, my shy way of speaking, but I didn't care. I was so happy to be there, to have a new notebook, colored pencils, history books, that the rest didn't matter. I studied in the morning and worked at the market in the afternoon. I would arrive home exhausted, but still summon energy to do homework by the light of an oil lamp. Sometimes I fell asleep on top of my notebook. My mother would cover me, turn off the lamp, and leave a kiss on my forehead. Life gradually improved. My mother got a steady job as a cook at the Southern Table restaurant. She earned better and had Sundays off. I advanced quickly in school, skipping grades. The teachers said I had a thirst for knowledge, that I absorbed everything like a sponge, but not everything was roses. The trauma of that rainy night was still there, well hidden, but always ready to appear when I let my guard down. I had frequent nightmares. I couldn't be alone with men, even harmless ones like the baker on the corner or the bus driver. At school, I fled from boys like the devil flees from the cross. If one got too close, I would start trembling, feeling nauseated, sometimes even fainting. The principal called my mother, concerned about my behavior. "Your daughter is intelligent, dedicated, but there's something strange. She seems afraid of men." My mother, without telling the truth, said only that I was traumatized because my grandfather had been violent. The principal didn't insist, but recommended that I talk with the school counselor, Mrs. Patricia Coleman. Mrs. Coleman was a lady in her 50s, with auburn-dyed hair pulled back in a bun, thick glasses perched on the tip of her nose. At first, I went reluctantly to the weekly sessions. I would sit in the hard chair in front of her desk and stay silent. "You don't need to talk if you don't want to," she would say. "You can just stay here, draw, look out the window." Gradually, I began to trust her. First, I talked about trivial things: school, work at the market, the neighborhood, then about missing my grandmother. Finally, one day, I told her everything my grandfather had done, how my grandmother and mother had reacted, how he had gone away, how we fled to Atlanta. Mrs. Coleman showed no horror, no disgust, no pity. She just listened, her eyes steady on mine behind those thick glasses. When I finished, exhausted and relieved for having taken that weight off my chest, she held my hands in hers. "Maggie, what happened to you is terrible and nothing will erase it. But you're not alone, you never were. Your mother and grandmother proved that night. And I'm here to tell you that you can have a full, happy life without letting that monster continue destroying you from the inside out." She lent me books, not just school books, but novels, poetry, stories of strong women who faced difficulties and won. She showed me that the world was much bigger than Red Clay Farm, bigger even than Atlanta, that there were possibilities I had never dreamed of. "Transform this pain into strength," she would always tell me. "Use it to build, not to destroy." By 16, I was already in middle school. I had left the market and found a better job as a clerk at a drugstore downtown. The owner, Harold Peterson, was a kind gentleman who quickly noticed my interest in medicines, in the complicated names, in the formulas. "Girl, you have a knack for this," he would say when he saw me reading the labels of medications in my spare time. "You learn quickly." He started teaching me the basics of pharmacy, how to organize medications, recognize generics, guide customers on simple dosages. Little by little, I gained confidence. I was no longer the frightened girl who trembled when a man entered the store. I was a professional, serious, competent, who knew what she was talking about. It was during this time that I met Elizabeth Betty Gardner, a regular client of the drugstore, an elegant lady in her 60s who always came to buy blood pressure medicine and vitamins. One day, she saw me studying at the counter during a quiet moment. "What are you reading with such concentration, my young lady?" "A science book, ma'am. I'm studying for the high school entrance exam." She took the book, leafed through it, returned it with a smile. "You like to study, don't you? I can see it in your eyes." "Yes, ma'am. I want to be a nurse someday." She looked at me for a while, as if she were evaluating me. You know, I was a teacher all my life. Now I'm retired, with too much time on my hands. If you want, I can help you with your studies. Free of charge. Of course. It would be a pleasure to have an interested student again. And so our private lessons began. 3 times a week, after closing the drugstore, I would go to Betty's apartment in the Midtown area. It was a beautiful place, full of books from floor to ceiling, with the smell of fresh coffee and butter cookies. She taught me math, English, science, everything I needed to pass the exams and enter high school. More than that, she taught me to believe in myself, to not see myself as a victim, but as a survivor, to understand that what had happened to me didn't define me. It was just a terrible chapter in a story I was still writing. Choose how your story will continue, she would say. The past is already written, it can't be changed. But the future, the future is blank, waiting for you to pick up the pen. In 1967, at 17 years old, I passed the entrance exam for Grady High School, the best public school in Atlanta. My mother cried when she received the news. She bought a small cake to celebrate a rare luxury in our house and invited Ruth, Betty, and Harold, the people who had helped us so much. My daughter is going to be somebody in life, she repeated proudly, her eyes shining with contained tears. She's going to be a nurse, she's going to take care of others, she's going to have the respect we never had. That night, lying on the mat we still used as a bed, I looked at my mother already asleep on the other side of the room. Her face, even in sleep, maintained that determined expression, that quiet strength that had saved the two of us on that stormy night. I thought about my grandmother, who even sick, even weak, had found the strength to stand up and defend her granddaughter. I thought of Ruth, Betty, Mrs. Coleman, women who had extended a hand when I needed it most, without asking for anything in return. It was that night that I understood. True strength is not in muscles, in weapons, in violence. It's in the ability to get up after each fall, to extend a hand to those who need it, to transform pain into action, trauma into purpose. The road ahead would still be long and difficult. There would be more obstacles, more moments of doubt, more scars to be healed. But that night, for the first time since we left Red Clay Farm, I felt I had a clear direction, a purpose that went beyond simply surviving. I was going to become a healer, not of herbs like Ruth, nor of books like Betty, but someone who understood the pain of others, because she knew her own pain all too well. Someone who could, perhaps, help other girls who had gone through the same hell as I had. The future was blank, waiting for me to pick up the pen, and I was ready to start writing. Grady High School was my biggest challenge up to then. When I stepped into those immense corridors, with marble floors and walls full of portraits of illustrious graduates, I felt I didn't belong in that place. Most of the students came from middle-class families. They had parents who were doctors, lawyers, teachers. I was the daughter of a cook, a resident of the projects, who worked in a drugstore to help at home. In the first days, I always sat at the back of the classroom, trying to make myself invisible. I didn't open my mouth, even when I knew the answer. The country accent still marked my speech, and I was terrified of becoming a joke. I ate lunch alone in the most distant corner of the yard with the lunchbox my mother prepared before dawn, before leaving for work. It was the biology teacher who first noticed my potential. Dr. Robert Mitchell, a gentleman in his 50s with gray hair and a calm voice that reminded me of my grandfather. Not the monster, but my mother's father, whom I barely got to know. Returning an exam where I got the top grade, he stopped at my desk. "You have a natural talent for science, Margaret. You shouldn't hide it at the back of the classroom." The next day, he brought me a borrowed book, Introduction to Human Anatomy. I devoured those pages like someone devouring a romance novel. For the first time, I understood how that complex machine that is the human body worked. I was especially fascinated by the nervous system, how electrical signals could create thoughts, feelings, memories. Perhaps because I wanted to understand what had happened in my own brain after the trauma. Why did I still wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night? Why did I tremble when men came too close? With Dr. Mitchell's encouragement, I began to participate more in classes. Gradually, I gained confidence. In the second year, I no longer sat at the back. I asked questions, answered when teachers asked. I even got up to solve equations on the board in math classes. Not that everything was easy. I had classmates who mocked my humble origins, my shy way of speaking, the simple clothes I wore. A group of rich girls, in particular, seemed to take pleasure in humiliating me in the corridors. Look at the hick from the drugstore, going to prescribe herb tea for us country folk? They would laugh as I passed. At first, I would lower my head and continue walking, swallowing my tears. But one day, tired of being stepped on, I stopped in the middle of the corridor and faced the leader of the group, Patricia, daughter of a famous doctor in the city. Do you know what the difference is between you and me, Patricia? You were born with everything ready. I have to fight for every crumb. So yes, I work in a drugstore with pride, and I'm going to keep rising in life while you'll continue being just Daddy's girl. The entire corridor fell silent. Patricia, red with anger or shame, I could never tell which, turned her back and left. After that day, they didn't mess with me anymore. We didn't become friends, of course, but at least I gained a silent respect. In 1973, I finished my first year of high school with the best grades in the class. Harold, seeing my growing interest in pharmacy, began to teach me more advanced things: how to prepare simple ointments, cough syrups, herbal tinctures. I mixed the scientific knowledge I learned at school with the folk wisdom I had inherited from my grandmother and learned from Ruth. Customers began to seek me out specifically, trusting my advice. My mother was radiant with my progress. She had been promoted to head chef at the restaurant. She earned better. She no longer needed to work so many overtime hours. We managed to move from the South Side projects to a slightly better neighborhood, Midtown. It was just a one-bedroom apartment, but it had a bathroom inside, a luxury we had never had, and it was closer to downtown, making it easier to get to work and school. It was during this time that I met Michael. He was a medical student, in his third year, and frequented the drugstore to buy materials for his practical classes: alcohol, gauze, basic medications. At first, I could barely look him in the eyes. Even after years, I still had a fear of young men, especially those who showed any interest in me. But Michael was different, educated, respectful, always maintained an appropriate distance, never made inappropriate comments. When he noticed my interest in medicine, he began to bring used books from the courses he had already taken. "You understand more about this than many of my college classmates," he commented one day after hearing me explain to an elderly customer how to correctly take high blood pressure medications. Gradually, a cautious friendship was born. We talked about medications, diseases, treatments. He told me about interesting cases from Emory University Hospital, where he did his internship. I shared knowledge of herbs I had learned from my grandmother and Ruth. My mother, always suspicious of any man who approached me, made a point of meeting him. She invited him for coffee at our home one Sunday. She made cornbread, put the embroidered tablecloth on the table, a gift from her former boss, kept an eye on his every move. "I liked him," she declared after Michael had left. "He has respect in his eyes." Coming from my mother, who had learned the hard way to distrust men, that was the highest compliment possible. In 1970, I finished high school. The graduation was a moment of glory. I, the daughter of a domestic worker without a father, coming from the country, receiving a diploma with honors as the best student in the class. From the audience, my mother cried silently, too proud even to applaud. Beside her were Betty, Ruth, Harold, and, to my surprise, Michael, who made a point of bringing flowers. The dream of medical school still seemed too distant. It was expensive, even the public one was hard to get into, and I needed to work. I had come too far to give up on my dreams. There had been a time when even high school seemed impossible for someone like me. Now I was determined to find a path forward in medicine, even if it wasn't the traditional one. I remembered what Ruth had told me years before. There are many ways to reach the mountaintop. Some take the well-trodden path, others make their own trail. But there was another path. The associate's degree in nursing at Emory University Hospital required only a high school diploma and had the advantage of being in the evening, allowing me to continue working at the drugstore during the day. I took the exam, passed in first place. When classes started, in March of 1000, 971. I was already 21, much older than most of my classmates, girls of 17, 18, just out of high school. I also had more practical experience because of my work at the drugstore, which gave me a certain advantage. The course was tough. Theoretical classes at night, internships on weekends. I slept little, studied on the bus, during breaks at work, in any gap I found, but I didn't mind. Each new piece of knowledge brought me closer to the dream of being a nurse, of being able to help people who were suffering. In the second year of the course, I began to intern in the gynecology and obstetrics ward. It was there that I found my true calling. Taking care of women, especially the most vulnerable, gave me a purpose that went beyond the profession. It was as if each pregnant teenager I welcomed, each woman victim of violence I comforted, was a piece of the girl I once was, needing the help that no one could give me. One case in particular deeply marked this phase. A 14-year-old girl, 7 months pregnant, arrived at the hospital with clear signs of a beating. Her husband, a man of almost 40, had bought her from her father for a motorcycle and a sack of flour back in the country. When she tried to escape, he beat her until she was nearly dead. The doctor on duty, Dr. Catherine Lewis, a woman of strong temperament and a sharp tongue, was furious when she saw the state of the girl. She expelled the husband from the room with shouts, threatened to call the police, did everything to protect the patient. I was amazed at her courage, her determination to defend that girl. After they stabilized the girl and admitted her for observation, Dr. Lewis called me to her office. "You have a way with this, Maggie. I saw how you took care of that girl, how you managed to calm her when no one else could. I just did my job, doctor. You did more than that. You have something special. True empathy. That's not taught in any college." It was she who encouraged me to specialize in caring for women victims of violence. At that time, such a formal specialization didn't even exist, but she guided me, lent me books, allowed me to accompany delicate cases that came to the hospital. In 1973, I graduated from the nursing program, once again with honors. I was 23 and had a job offer at Emory University Hospital itself, in the gynecology and obstetrics ward. Of course, the salary wasn't the best, but it had Social Security, health insurance, stability. My mother and I were finally able to realize a dream, to buy a small house of our own in Midtown. 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, a small yard where she planted herbs and spices, a little reminiscent of the farm we had left behind. Michael also graduated that year. He was now doing his residency, the last stage before becoming a real doctor. We continued to be friends, growing closer. He would come to dinner at our house frequently, bringing books. We would talk about difficult cases, about the challenges of the profession. One day, after one of these dinners, when I was walking him to the gate, he held my hand. It was the first time we had any physical contact, beyond a formal handshake. I almost pulled my hand back, in an automatic reflex of years of fear, but something made me stay. "Can I ask you a question, Maggie?" he said, his voice low in the warm Atlanta night. "Sure. Why do you never let me get close? I don't just mean physically. You maintain a distance, a barrier I can't cross." I felt my heart speed up. In 5 years of friendship, I had never told him about what happened at Red Clay Farm, about my grandfather, about the rainy night, about the trauma I still carried. "It's a very long story," I answered, looking away. "I have all the time in the world." And there, sitting on the small wall in front of my house, under a starry December sky, I told him everything. For the second time in my life, the first had been with Mrs. Coleman. I opened that box, locked with 7 keys inside me. I talked about the abuse, about the reaction of my mother and grandmother, about the escape to Atlanta, about the invisible scars I still carried. When I finished, I was exhausted, as if I had run a marathon. I couldn't look at him for fear of what I would see in his eyes: disgust, pity, disappointment. Michael was silent for a time that seemed eternal. Then, with infinite gentleness, he took my hand again. "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me this," he said simply. "I will never do anything to hurt you or frighten you. I will never cross boundaries that you don't want crossed. I just want to be by your side, At your pace, in the way you need. That night, something broke inside me. Not in a bad way, but like a dam that breaks and releases long-held-back waters. I cried like I hadn't cried since the death of my grandmother. I cried for the girl I had been, for the lost innocence, for the stolen time. Michael just stayed there holding my hand, without trying to hug me, respecting my space, my rhythm, understanding, as few would understand, that for someone with trauma like mine, even a well-intentioned hug could be an invasion. From that night on, our relationship changed. It didn't turn into a romance right away. I still wasn't ready, but the barrier had fallen. I no longer needed to pretend to be strong all the time. I didn't need to hide my scars. For the first time, I was with someone who knew everything and still looked at me with respect, with admiration. This marked a turning point in our relationship, though we still had a long journey ahead. And so, time passed. I worked at the hospital. Michael finished his residency and began his practice in pediatrics. We saw each other whenever our schedules allowed. Sometimes we had dinner together in the hospital cafeteria, exhausted after long shifts. Other times, we walked through Piedmont Park on the rare occasions our days off coincided. It was a slow process full of ups and downs. There were days when I could hold his hand without trembling, others when the mere thought of intimacy would send me into panic. Michael never pressured, never demanded, always respected my pace. In 1981, after almost 5 years of this friendship, which was already more than friendship but still had no name, he officially asked me to be his girlfriend. He had finished his residency, been hired as a pediatrician at the same hospital where I worked. He brought flowers, daisies, my favorites, and took me to dinner at a simple but beautiful restaurant by the lake. "You don't need to answer now," he said after making the request. "I know it's a difficult step for you. Think about it carefully." I didn't need to think. For the first time in my life, I had absolute certainty about something related to a man. "Yes," I answered, surprising us both with the quickness of the response. "But you'll have to be patient with me. Very patient." He smiled in that calm way that only he had. "Patience is not something I lack, Maggie. I waited almost 5 years just to be able to hold your hand without you trembling. I can wait as long as necessary for the rest." Our courtship was a healing process for me. Each small gesture of affection, a kiss on the forehead, our fingers intertwined, a brief hug, was a victory over the trauma. Each barrier I managed to break down was celebrated, not as a concession I was making to him, but as a liberation I was conquering for myself. My mother, always protective, took time to fully accept the relationship. It wasn't because of Michael. She liked him from the beginning. It was from fear of seeing me hurt again, of seeing me relive the trauma. "Men are treacherous creatures, my daughter," she would say when we were alone. "They seem tame, but they can change at any moment. Your grandfather wasn't always that monster either. In the beginning, he was even affectionate with your grandmother, from what she told me. Michael is different, Mom." "I know it here," I would respond, pointing to my heart. "And if he's not, you yourself taught me to be strong. I'm not that frightened girl from Red Clay Farm anymore." In 1982, after a year of dating, we got engaged. It was a simple ceremony at home, just with our closest friends. Ruth, now quite elderly, but still making the best cornbread in the city. Betty, who had become almost a second mother to me. Harold, who closed the drugstore early, especially for the occasion. Michael gave me a simple ring, what he could afford with his still modest salary as a newly certified doctor, but to me it was worth more than any diamond. It represented not just a commitment between us, but my own victory over the past. That same year, I managed to realize another dream, completing my advanced certification at Emory School of Nursing, building on the associate's degree I'd earned earlier. The hospital had a scholarship program for promising employees, and my boss, Dr. Lewis, made a point of recommending me. I studied in the morning, worked in the afternoon and early evening. It was demanding, but each new piece of knowledge I acquired gave me more tools to help other wounded women, as I had been. Everything finally seemed to be falling into place in my life. I had a job I loved. I was studying. I had a wonderful fiancé, a modest but comfortable house, a healthy mother who was proud of my progress. The wounds of the past were still there, scars that never completely disappeared, but they no longer bled with every touch, no longer defined who I was or what I could become. But fate, that unpredictable novelist, still had surprises in store for me. And what happened in February of 1983 would once again change the course of my life, testing everything I had learned about strength, about healing, about overcoming. February of 1983 began like any other winter month in Atlanta. Biting cold, a sun that seemed to barely warm the earth, the streets less crowded than usual. I was finishing my advanced certification at Emory School of Nursing, balancing between studies, work at the hospital, and preparations for the wedding scheduled for December of that year. Tired, but happier than I had ever been. It was on a Tuesday. I remember as if it were today. I arrived home after a tough shift in obstetrics, 3 complicated deliveries in a single night. I found my mother sitting on the porch, staring at nothing, a crumpled paper in her hand. I knew immediately that something serious had happened. "Mom, what is it?" She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, her eyes red from crying a lot. "A letter," she said, extending the crumpled paper. "From Oakville." Oakville was the town closest to Red Clay Farm, from where we had fled 15 years earlier. We had never received news from there, nor sought to know. It was a closed chapter, a turned page that we preferred not to revisit. I took the letter with trembling hands. It was from Martha Jenkins, that neighbor who had taken me in on the night of the storm. She wrote that after all these years, my grandfather had returned to Oakville asking questions about us. He'd learned we were in Atlanta, and through some connections with a nephew who worked at the post office there, Martha had managed to track down our address. The reason for her letter froze my blood. My grandfather was alive. "It's not possible," I said, letting the paper fall. "Mom, you said the river." "I thought he had died," my mother answered, her voice trembling. "The stones, the current. No one could have survived that, but he did. According to the letter, he had been found by fishermen downstream, nearly dead. Taken to a hospital in Charleston, he spent months between life and death. The blow to his head had caused permanent damage, memory loss, difficulty speaking, paralysis of the right side of his body. He's coming back," my mother continued, the terror evident in every word. "Martha says he hired someone to look for us, that he keeps repeating my name and yours, that he wants to settle scores." The world seemed to crumble around me. 15 years of reconstruction, of healing, of a new life. And that ghost reappeared from the past to haunt us, worse, to threaten us. "He can't do anything, Mom," I tried to say without much conviction. "He's old, sick, and if he comes, we'll report him. Now we're not just 2 women alone on an isolated farm." "You don't understand." She shook her head. "It's not just what he can do, it's what he can say about that night." I understood her fear. Even in self-defense, even protecting her daughter, she would have difficulty explaining what happened afterward. The body in the river, the escape, the lie we had maintained for so many years. And I, about to graduate, engaged to a respected doctor. How would my reputation fare if everything came to light? That same night, I told everything to Michael. He listened in silence, holding my hands that wouldn't stop trembling. When I finished, I expected to see fear, hesitation, perhaps even the decision to distance himself from a family with such a dark secret. "We'll figure something out," was what he said with a calmness that amazed me. "I won't let anyone hurt you or your mother. Never again." The next morning, he brought a lawyer friend to talk with us. Attorney William Cooper didn't want to know details. He said that the less he knew, the better he could help us. He only asked the essentials. Was there abuse? Was there a threat to life? Was the reaction proportional to the threat? In that case, he concluded after hearing our answers, if your grandfather appears with accusations, we have a solid defense, legitimate defense of honor and of life. The problem will be explaining why you didn't go to the police at the time. In those days, in that place, police wasn't an option for a poor woman. My mother answered, her voice bitter. They would say it was her fault, that she provoked it, that she deserved it. The lawyer nodded, understanding. Let's hope it's just the delusion of a sick old man and that he never appears. But if he does, call me immediately. The following weeks were of constant tension. Each knock on the door, each unfamiliar face on the street put us on alert. My mother could barely sleep, startling at any noise. I began having the old nightmares again, waking up sweating in the middle of the night, reliving the terror of that rainy night. Michael was my rock during this period. He began staying at our house frequently, in the guest room, of course, respecting the customs of the time. His presence brought some security, the certainty that we were no longer alone. 2 months passed without news. We began to relax, to think that perhaps it was all just a scare. Until one April afternoon, returning from college, I found an old man standing at the gate of my house, thin, leaning on a cane, the right side of his face drooping in an evident paralysis. For a second I didn't recognize him. Time and disease had completely transformed that tall, strong man who populated my nightmares. "Margaret," he said, his slurred voice difficult to understand. "My granddaughter." I froze in place. The world seemed to stop spinning. There he was, the monster of my nightmares, the shadow that had darkened my childhood, the man who had destroyed my innocence, but who now was just a sick old man, almost defenseless. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling less than I expected. "To talk, just talk." I don't know where I found the courage, but I opened the gate and let him in. Perhaps it was the security of being in my territory, in my adult home, and no longer a defenseless child. Or perhaps it was simply the need to close that chapter once and for all. We sat on the porch, me in a chair, him on the wooden bench. I kept my distance, my eyes fixed on him, ready to run if necessary, but he seemed to have no strength even to stand without the help of the cane. "I thought you had died in the river," I finally said, breaking the heavy silence. "I almost died," he answered, his good hand smoothing the cane. "I lost a lot that night. Memory, strength, everything. What did you come here to do? Threaten, denounce? Because if that's it, you can leave. We're not afraid of you." He shook his head, a slow, tired movement. "I came to ask for forgiveness." Those 3 words caught me completely off guard. Of all the things I imagined he might say, that had never crossed my mind. "Forgiveness?" I repeated incredulously. "Do you think a simple forgiveness erases what you did? What you tried to do to me? The hell you put my mother and my grandmother through?" "No," he answered, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Nothing erases it. I know that." "Then why did you come? Because you're dying?" He coughed. A harsh, painful sound. "Pancreatic cancer." "A few months," the doctors said. I didn't want to go without saying, without asking. I remained silent, observing that broken man in front of me. The hatred I expected to feel didn't come. In its place, a strange mixture of pity and indifference. He no longer had power over me. He was just an old man dying, laden with belated remorse. "I can't forgive you," I finally said. "Nor do I have that right. Forgiveness would have to come from the girl I was that night. And she no longer exists. You killed her." He nodded slowly. "I understand. What I did has no name, no excuse, no forgiveness. I know that. If you came to clear your conscience before dying, I'm sorry. I can't give you that peace." He raised his eyes to me for the first time. "I don't deserve peace. I just came because I needed to tell you, for you to know that I recognize the monster I was." We sat in silence for a time that seemed eternal. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the porch with orange hues. From inside the house came the smell of dinner my mother was preparing, unaware of the visitor we had. "My mother can't see you here," I finally said. "It would be too much for her." "I didn't come for her. I came for you." He made an effort to get up, leaning heavily on the cane. "I won't bother you anymore. I just wanted you to know that I never accused you all. When people asked me what had happened, I said I fell into the river. Drunk. My fault." I didn't respond. I accompanied him to the gate, keeping my distance, like someone escorting an intruder out of the house. Before leaving, He turned one last time. "You look like your grandmother," he said, his voice almost a whisper. She was always stronger than me. And so he left, dragging himself along the sidewalk, supported by the cane, a pathetic figure that in no way resembled the monster of my nightmares. I stood watching until he turned the corner and disappeared, a mix of contradictory emotions washing over me like waves. I didn't tell my mother about the visit. She had suffered too much already. She didn't need this ghost resurfacing in her life. I only told Michael, who hugged me in silence while I cried. Not from pain or fear, but from relief. A cycle that was closing, an old wound that, though never completely healing, finally stopped bleeding. 3 months later, we received the news. My grandfather had died from pancreatic cancer in a charity hospital in Charleston, alone, without family, without anyone to hold his hand in his final moments. He had come to our house that day with intentions of reconciliation, but his time was already running out. The cancer had spread further than he had admitted. Despite all the pain he had caused us, I couldn't help but feel a complex mix of emotions at his passing. Relief that the chapter was truly closed, pity for the lonely end he met, and a strange sense of peace knowing that justice, in its own way, had been served. I felt a strange compassion for that man who, in the end, reaped exactly what he had sown. Loneliness, abandonment, contempt. "May God have mercy on his soul," was all my mother said when she learned, "because I cannot." Life followed its course. I graduated from Emory School of Nursing in June of 1983 at 33 years old. It was a day of immense pride. I, daughter of a domestic worker, granddaughter of a cotton cutter, now a certified nurse. My mother cried during the entire ceremony, clutching Michael's hand, whom she already considered as a son. As I stood there in my white cap and gown, I couldn't help but think of how far we'd come from that little wooden house with the dirt floor. The journey from Red Clay Farm to this graduation stage wasn't measured just in miles, but in determination, sacrifice, and healing. That nursing diploma represented more than academic achievement. It was proof that we can rise above our circumstances and transform even the deepest wounds into sources of strength. We married in December of the same year, in a simple ceremony in a chapel in downtown Atlanta. I, who thought I would never be able to trust any man, was now taking a step that had seemed impossible years before. It wasn't easy. The intimacy of marriage brought challenges that only someone who has gone through trauma like mine can understand. But Michael, with his infinite patience, his constant respect, never pressured me, never made me feel guilty for the difficulties. In 1985, we were blessed with the birth of our daughter, Eleanor Ellie, named in honor of my grandmother, who had the strength to stand up that night, even while sick, to defend me. And in 1987 came our son, James, Jimmy, completing our family. I continued working at the hospital, but now with special focus on a project I helped create, a center for attending to women and children victims of sexual violence. It was pioneering work at the time, when little was spoken about these topics, when the blame still fell on the victims. My personal experience, which for so many years was an open wound, now transformed into an instrument to heal other wounds. My mother lived with us until the end, helping to raise the grandchildren, finally enjoying the peace and security that she deserved her whole life. I often caught her watching the children with a mixture of joy and something like wonder, perhaps, marveling at how different their childhood was from mine, how safe and loved they felt every day. She never spoke much about Red Clay Farm or my grandfather, but sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, I'd see her touch the small scar above her eyebrow, a permanent reminder of that night, and then look at my children playing freely, without fear. In those silent moments, I knew she was acknowledging how we had broken the cycle, how we had rewritten our family's story. She departed serenely in 2000, at 86 years old, victim of a massive stroke. Until her last day, she maintained that silent strength, that dignity that not even the worst moments could take from her. The years went by, the children grew up, followed their paths. Ellie became a doctor like her father. Jimmy chose law, specializing in defense of women victims of violence. Both know my story. I decided there would be no secrets, not in this new generation, that they would understand from an early age the value of respect, of consent, of dignity. Michael and I grew old together, seeing grandchildren being born, building a life that, despite the scars at the beginning, was rich in love and achievements. He retired in 2008, after years dedicated to pediatrics. I continued for a few more years, until fatigue and age made me stop too. And now, at 75, this same destiny that gave so many turns in my life presents me with its final chapter, as the disease spreads through my body and my time grows short. It's ironic that it's the same disease that killed my grandfather so many years ago, a strange symmetry that I've come to accept as part of life's mysterious patterns, as if somehow our destinies were tied by an invisible thread that neither time nor distance could cut. But unlike him, I don't depart alone. I have my family around me, the love of my husband who grew old with me, my children, my grandchildren. I have the clear conscience of someone who, despite the wounds, chose not to become wounded, who transformed pain into purpose, trauma into strength to help others. If I'm telling this story now, it's not to cause pity, nor to receive compliments for a strength that, honestly, I don't know where it came from. I tell it because I know that out there, at this very moment, there are girls and women going through the same hell I went through, suffering in silence, thinking there is no way out, that they don't deserve better, that it's their fault. To you, my dears, I want to say, there is a way out, there is a new beginning, there is healing, not complete perhaps, but sufficient to build a dignified, happy, full life. It's not easy, it's not quick, it's not magical. It's a process of days, months, years, sometimes a lifetime, but it is possible. I am living proof of this. As I prepare to leave this world, I carry with me the certainty that, despite everything, I managed to flourish in a terrain that was made only of thorns. I managed to transform poison into medicine. The frightened girl from Red Clay Farm, the teenager who arrived in Atlanta with nothing but the clothes on her body and the scars on her soul, managed to become a woman, a mother, a professional, a person who, I dare say, made a difference in this world. Through my work and support groups, I share real stories of other women who, like me, carry invisible scars under visible wrinkles. Women who survived private wars that the world never recognized, but who deserve to be heard and honored. My time here is gradually coming to an end, but I leave with a peaceful heart, knowing that I have lived a meaningful life. The wounds, though they can never be completely erased, have taught me profound lessons, and I understand that they have shaped the person I am today. I have learned to bloom even among the thorns, and I want you to know that, no matter how tough life gets, we can still find the light at the end of the road. Pain, abuse, violence, or betrayal cannot define us. Only we can decide who we are, and we have the power to choose not to let the past hold back our future. That is the message I want to share. To the women out there who are fighting alone, I just want to say, never give up. Believe that you deserve a full, complete, and happy life. Because, in the end, you are the one who decides your life. My story ends here. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and like the channel to hear more real stories about life.